My name is Clare Jackson. I'm a senior consultant at Ecuity, and we make up half of the sort of secretariat of the Hydrogen Taskforce. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction as to who the Hydrogen Taskforce are. So we are a sort of group of organisations that we sort of launched March last year. So we bring together the organisations that are leading or looking to lead on hydrogen in the UK across the whole sort of value chain. And we're looking to sort of develop a vision for hydrogen in the UK, so what could be achieved here, and then sort of develop a sort of collective position on the next steps that need to happen now to make that sort of vision a reality. So part of that is looking to make that sort of high level sort of energy system, economic, environmental case for why hydrogen is really important in the UK. We have around sort of 20 organisations that are involved in this process. You might sort of notice there that we don't have an awful lot of companies that are working in the sort of end use areas of the transport sector. Really interested if there are any sort of organisations that are watching today who are interested in being part of this process. We'd really sort of value that expertise. In terms of why hydrogen, Sam's touched on a little bit of this, but I'll just sort of talk about it as well. So we sort of see there's a number of reasons why hydrogen is really important for the UK. Our view is that whilst hydrogen is not a silver bullet, it can't solve all of our problems. It's not going to get us to net zero on its own. That actually net zero is actually not possible without hydrogen. Hydrogen has a really key role to play, and that's for a number of different reasons. A number of different sort of benefits that hydrogen has. So first, it enables us to sort of have a greater deployment of renewable technologies. So we're sort of starting to get to a point now where, as we're deploying more offshore wind, we're starting to get to a point where we're actually experiencing some curtailment. Times when demand is low, but the wind is blowing and it's all sunny, and we're starting to sort of switch off some of those renewables, which sort of impacts the economics of those technologies. So by having hydrogen as a potential storage mechanism for some of that, we can start to deploy even more of those renewables over the next decade. Hydrogen also, the use of hydrogen will also reduce pressure on the electricity transmission networks. So that's as opposed to a sort of complete electrification of everything that we can sort of electrify. So just to sort of give you some sort of context for that. So we have around sort of 350 sort of terawatt hours of electricity sort of demand in the UK annually. We also have about 750 terawatt hours of heat and about 650 terawatt hours of transport, which all use sort of chemical energy carriers. So if we were trying to move those two domains onto the electricity transmission network and electrify them all, we're sort of talking about sort of 4 times as much cables that we would need to lay. And you all experience that disruption that happens when we start digging up the roads to try and reinforce our electricity transmission network. So perhaps using some of the sort of existing infrastructure that we've got in terms of the gas network could be a really great way of reducing the pressure that comes from electrification on the electricity transmission network. And sort of part of that is around sort of demand variation and storage. So, for example, heat has a really big sort of seasonal swing, and being able to store energy in the summer and use it in the winter, using something like hydrogen would be really beneficial. Hard to abate sectors that are really hard to electrify, such as sort of industrial applications, some of those heavy duty sort of transport applications. Hydrogen is a really good fit for that. Sort of energy system resilience, not just being reliant on one thing, but also having that sort of slightly more rounded energy system. And also then there's the global market opportunity. So hydrogen, as sort of Sam outlined there, getting an awful lot of attention globally. There's going to be a big demand for it globally. And if the UK can come out ahead of that, then there's a huge potential benefit for the UK in that. So some key questions, I think, for sort of 2021, the sort of things that we're thinking about now is, what is the role of hydrogen in the UK? What role could hydrogen play? And what do we actually need to do now in order to achieve that? So some of those questions, like So how much hydrogen, realistically can we produce? If we have this hydrogen, where should it be used? Which parts of our energy system? What are the sort of carbon implications for using hydrogen? What are the energy system implications for using hydrogen? Where is it that the UK can take a sort of global leadership position? Where should we be a leader and where should we be a follower? What are the existing assets that we have that we can leverage? And what sort of economic benefit would this unlock if we were to do this? And then the question of, what is it that we need to do now in order to sort of unlock that? What are the barriers? Why is this not happening now? What business models do we need to have in place in order to start to scale these technologies? What's the role of government? What's the role of industry? How do we encourage coordination across the different sort of sectors? Hydrogen is not a sort of single technology. It's a whole sort of ecosystem. With all of these different end use technologies, if we're starting to look at clusters, how do we get sort of coordination there? How do we ensure that we've got the right skills as we scale up? What infrastructure might we need? And also, how do we ensure that we're bringing consumers along with us in this? A lot of these technologies are going to they're going to touch the end consumer, whether that's hydrogen boilers in your house or whether that's sitting in a hydrogen fuel cell bus on the way to work. And we need to make sure that we take consumers along with us. So I don't have time. I've got 10 minutes to go into all of these questions. But I'm just going to sort of touch on a couple based on some analysis that the Hydrogen Taskforce has done recently around sort of what might we be able to achieve in the next 10 years in terms of hydrogen production, and where in the sort of end use sectors should we be putting that hydrogen. So this is the world's most boring slide in the sense that it's a table with a bunch of figures on it. But I've got a graphical format of it on the next slide, but I think having the figures on the pages actually can be really helpful. So the 10-point plan, as Sam said, the government's committed to trying to reach a sort of 5 gigawatt production capacity by 2030. So we've done a bit of an exercise over the last few months of looking at all the different projects that are in the UK that are currently in the sort of pipeline of things that people have started to put plans together to do, like HyNet or Acorn or the sort of Teesside project. And we basically aggregated all of those. And that's sort of our high scenario there. Is an aggregation of all the projects that everyone wants to do in the UK at the moment. So that sort of totals up to just under 23 gigawatts of capacity with a sort of demand of servicing a demand of 160, just under 162 terawatt hours of end use demand. And what we've also done is looked at those projects and looked at where those projects want to put the hydrogen. So where are they saying that they're going to sort of put hydrogen at the moment? And that's where you see the sort of those figures there. We've also then done a sort of central and low scenario. So the Hydrogen Task Force members have given us some sort of views on where the constraints might be, which sort of end use sectors might be able to move a little bit quicker, where there's a little bit more uncertainty. And so we sort of pared down those for sort of low and central scenarios. But I guess a couple of things to note on this is firstly that there's an awful lot more in the pipeline than what the government says that it wants to do by 2030. That's not to say that we'll be able to do 23 gigawatts by 2030. I think that's wishful thinking. But we might be able to be a little bit more ambitious than we're being at the moment. I'm just going to sort of flick onto the next slide, which is a sort of slightly more graphical form of those sort of 3 scenarios. I think what you sort of note here is that the sort of big sort of sectors that are going to be taking that hydrogen in the first instance are sort of industrial applications, potential sort of power generation, and also some blending within the sort of gas grid. And you'll see that actually, we're talking about transport, but the actual volume of hydrogen that would potentially be used in transport is actually low. And I guess the thing that I would say about that is that's not actually necessarily reflective of the sort of number of, we can still get some pretty decent numbers of vehicles on the road. They don't actually necessarily need a huge amount of hydrogen. So if I just sort of, flick back onto this screen, if we're looking at perhaps 100 terawatt hours of hydrogen by 2030. So if so 1 million cars is about 3 terawatt hours of hydrogen. Similarly, if we're looking at, 10,000 buses, that would be sort of 2 terawatt hours, or 10,000 HGVs that use about the same annually. It's about 2 terawatt hours of hydrogen. Or 1,000 trains is 1 terawatt hour. So that we can get some reasonable volumes of vehicles. They don't necessarily take as much hydrogen. So although that little red slither looks quite small, it's actually reflective of some reasonable numbers of vehicles. So the other thing the Hydrogen Task Force did last year is we looked at a sort of economic impact assessment. We think that there's significant value to be gained from the UK not being a follower, but being a sort of leader in hydrogen technology. There's huge export potential. So we've just basically looked at the economic value and job creation on a sort of 2035 timeframe across the sort of hydrogen value chain that could be created or protected in the UK by sort of pursuing hydrogen. We sort of estimate that we could see 18 billion of GVA and 75,000 jobs by 2035. And again, just sort of picking out the sort of transport numbers there, we can see about 1.7 billion of GVA and 9,000 jobs in the sort of transport sector. So we think there's sort of huge value to be gained by moving quickly in this area for hydrogen. So in terms of sort of next steps and what needs to happen now, sort of Sam has again sort of touched on this. There's a number of things that need to happen sort of over the next 10 years, but I think particularly looking at what needs to happen now, we are going to see a hydrogen strategy, which we're very excited about seeing that in the next sort of couple of months. This sort of comes alongside, what's happened sort of globally. We've seen lots and lots of countries coming out with targets and strategies, and the UK will be next. It'll be really important that this hydrogen strategy is ambitious and sort of sets us up. And then the second thing is the sort of business models. This is absolutely critical for getting these early stage projects off the ground. And I think it's important in this area that the perfect doesn't become the enemy of the good. And I think getting those early stage projects off the ground will be really key for the next year. So that's all that I'm going to sort of share, and I think I'll pass back to Philippa. I think we'll introduce the next panelist.